Someone told me something I think about a lot. She said she'd been waking up every morning for about 3 years with her hands so stiff she had to run them under warm water before she could hold her coffee cup, just to hold a cup of coffee. And she said she'd stopped thinking of it as a problem. She thought that was just what mornings were supposed to feel like after 65. She'd accepted it, filed it under getting older, and moved on. Then she made some very specific changes to what she was eating. No medications changed, nothing else changed, just what was on her plate. And about 6 weeks later, she picked up her coffee cup and didn't think about it. It was just a cup of coffee again. These aren't foods that are vaguely good for inflammation in some general, somewhere down the line way. Several of them have actual clinical trial data showing reductions in real reported pain, not just blood markers, not just numbers on a lab report. Actual pain, the kind you feel when you get up in the morning, when you climb stairs, when you open a jar. Some of them work in weeks, so let's get into it. Fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, trout. Most people file these under vaguely healthy and don't think much beyond that. But there's a 5-year study of nearly 1,000 older adults, all age 60 and up, that tracked exactly how much oily fish they were eating and then measured pain outcomes over time. Not inflammation markers in a lab, pain, the kind they were actually experiencing. The people eating oily fish just 1.5 times a week had 32% lower odds of developing new pain over those 5 years, and 30% lower odds of existing pain getting worse. That's a measurable 5-year difference in how people's bodies feel from one habit, twice a week. The reason is omega-3 fatty acids, and what they do specifically is interrupt the chemical chain reaction that produces inflammation before pain signals even start firing. Less like putting out a fire, more like removing the fuel before it can ignite. Turmeric is next, and this is the one most people already have in their kitchen and have never thought of as medicine. I know it has a complicated reputation. Golden lattes, supplement shelves full of extravagant claims. It's become genuinely easy to dismiss. Don't dismiss it. A review of 17 clinical trials found that turmeric preparations significantly reduced knee pain in people with osteoarthritis, and across multiple of those trials, the pain reduction was comparable to NSAIDs, comparable to ibuprofen, a kitchen spice performing at the level of a drug you buy at the pharmacy, and critically, without the gastrointestinal side effects that come with long-term NSAID use, which for a lot of people over 60 is actually the bigger concern. One practical thing that matters here: curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, absorbs poorly on its own. Adding black pepper to whatever you're cooking with turmeric increases that absorption substantially. Small step, real difference. Don't skip the pepper. Extra virgin olive oil. And I want to come back to that ibuprofen comparison for a second, because olive oil has its own version of the same story. The extra virgin part matters more than most labels do, so stay with me on this. Olive oil contains a compound called oleocanthal. What oleocanthal does is inhibit the same inflammatory enzymes as ibuprofen. When researchers first identified this, they described it as a natural anti-inflammatory drug. That's their language, not mine. To be precise, the amount in a daily serving of olive oil isn't equivalent to taking a tablet. That's not the claim. The claim is that it works through the same biological pathway, and when you're using it consistently as your primary cooking fat, that pathway is being modulated every single day. That's a very different conversation than a food being generically heart-healthy. Regular olive oil, refined olive oil, light olive oil. Most of the oleocanthal is removed in processing. It has to say extra virgin, and look for a harvest date on the bottle rather than just an expiration date. Fresher oil has higher concentrations of the active compounds. That detail costs nothing to act on. Berries, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, and especially tart cherries. The pigments that give these fruits their deep colors, the blues, the reds, the purples, aren't just cosmetic. They're compounds called anthocyanins, and they do something specific. They suppress the inflammatory signals that drive joint pain and stiffness through multiple pathways at once. That's actually why they tend to work more consistently than a single target compound. There's no one switch being flipped. It's a broader dampening of the whole system. The Arthritis Foundation has noted that some researchers directly compare the anti-inflammatory properties of tart cherries to NSAIDs, same family of effects, and you don't need to go anywhere special to find them. And here's the practical note that matters. Fresh or frozen, the anthocyanins are intact. You don't need to buy fresh berries. A cup of frozen blueberries or tart cherries stirred into yogurt in the morning is doing the same work. Often more reliably, because frozen fruit is picked and frozen at peak ripeness. Don't let the fresh versus frozen question be the reason you're not eating these. Where berries are working across multiple pathways at once, ginger is more targeted than that, and that specificity is exactly what makes it interesting. It tends to get lumped in with spices that are good for you and left at that. It deserves a closer look. Ginger works through a specific pathway. It inhibits an enzyme called KIOX2. That's the same enzyme that many prescription and over-the-counter anti-inflammatories are designed to block. This isn't ginger being vaguely soothing. It's a targeted mechanism. The Arthritis Foundation notes that studies have shown ginger relieves the pain of osteoarthritis better than placebo and reduces inflammatory markers in rheumatoid arthritis. Why does that distinction matter? Because it means ginger isn't just reducing inflammation as a side effect of being healthy. It's doing the same specific job that a lot of medications are doing, through food. One thing worth knowing, fresh and dried ginger both work. They have slightly different active compound profiles, but the anti-inflammatory effect is there in either form. So whichever version makes it easiest to use consistently is the right answer. Grated into a stir-fry, steeped in hot water, blended into a smoothie. Consistency is what produces the effect. Leafy greens, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, collard greens tend to get credited for their fiber and their vitamins and left at that too. There's a more specific story here, and it connects to something a lot of people over 60 are dealing with without knowing it. Magnesium. Leafy greens are one of the richest dietary sources of magnesium, and magnesium matters for inflammation in a way that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Deficiency in magnesium directly increases the production of inflammatory molecules in the body. It also raises pain sensitivity, meaning that when you're low, pain registers more intensely than it otherwise would. Studies estimate somewhere between 20 and 40% of older adults are actually deficient, not borderline, deficient. So for a significant portion of people watching this, adding more dark leafy greens isn't just anti-inflammatory in a general sense. It's correcting a deficit that's actively making inflammation worse and pain more intense. 2 cups of cooked spinach covers roughly 40% of the daily magnesium requirement. That's a meaningful contribution just from one side dish. Walnuts are interesting because they sit at an intersection most people aren't thinking about when they're focused on joint pain. Yes, they're a plant-based omega-3 that the body can partially convert to the same anti-inflammatory compounds found in fatty fish. That's the joint piece, and it connects back to what we covered earlier. But the more underreported story with walnuts is what they do for inflammation in the brain. Neuroinflammation, inflammation specifically in the brain, is increasingly understood as a significant driver of fatigue, not just cognitive fog, though that too. The deeper kind of tiredness. The kind where you wake up already exhausted even after a full night of sleep and can't quite explain why. Research looking at walnuts and brain health has found they reduce markers of neuroinflammation and protect against the overactivation of the brain's immune cells, the ones responsible for driving that low-grade inflammatory state that contributes to mental and physical fatigue alike. For anyone dealing with both pain and low energy, which is an extremely common combination, walnuts are working on both at once, 1 handful a day, about an ounce. That's the dose that shows up consistently in the research. Cruciferous vegetables work through a completely different mechanism than anything we've covered so far. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower. Most people eat these because they know vegetables are good for them. Very few know about sulforaphane. Sulforaphane is a compound that forms when cruciferous vegetables are cut or chewed. It's activated by that physical process, which is actually why slightly undercooking them preserves more of it. Heat degrades the enzyme that creates it. A light steam, a quick roast, raw in a salad. All of these give you more sulforaphane than boiling them until soft. What it does specifically, it suppresses a signaling molecule that acts as a master switch for chronic inflammation in the body. When that switch is stuck in the on position, which is exactly what happens with long-term chronic inflammation, sulforaphane helps turn it off. Animal research has shown it slowing cartilage damage in osteoarthritis. And the Arthritis Foundation specifically names these vegetables as ones people with joint disease should be eating regularly. Worth seeking out if you can find them. Broccoli sprouts. They contain significantly more sulforaphane than mature broccoli. A small amount delivers a larger dose than a full serving of the vegetable. They're increasingly available in grocery stores and easy to add to a salad or sandwich. All of the compounds we've been talking about, the omega-3s, the curcumin, the sulforaphane, they only work if your body can actually absorb them. That's where fermented foods come in. Yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha. This is the one that quietly amplifies everything else on this list. Roughly 70% of your immune system lives in and around your gut, and the bacteria that populate the gut are directly involved in regulating how much inflammation the body produces, how it responds to triggers, how quickly it settles down after a flare. When that bacterial ecosystem is diverse and healthy, the inflammatory response stays regulated. When it's depleted, the system runs louder than it should. So what does that mean for everything we've covered so far? It means fermented foods aren't just doing their own anti-inflammatory job. They're creating the gut environment where your body can actually absorb and use the compounds in the fish, the turmeric, the leafy greens, the berries. A depleted gut is a leaky filter. A well-supported gut is one where the nutrition you're eating is actually getting through. Fermented foods introduce beneficial bacteria and produce compounds that directly reduce inflammatory signaling in the gut wall. The energy connection is real and direct. Better gut health means better nutrient absorption, and better absorption means more of what you're eating is actually working. One distinction that matters: yogurt and kefir need to say live and active cultures on the label. Processing kills the bacteria, so that label tells you something important. Sauerkraut and kimchi from the refrigerated section contain live cultures. The shelf-stable versions on the regular grocery shelf typically don't. The last one on this list pulls double duty, and it's the one that most directly earns both sides of what we're talking about today. Green tea. The active compound reduces inflammatory molecules in the body, helps protect cartilage from degradation, and quiets the kind of chronic, low-grade background inflammation that builds up over time. And it does it without suppressing the immune response entirely, which matters because you still need inflammation to heal. The goal is always to quiet the chronic noise, not silence the system. The energy piece is real here too, and it's specific. Green tea contains L-theanine, an amino acid that works alongside the caffeine to produce a calm, focused alertness. Not the spike and crash of coffee, more of a sustained attention. For people who are sensitive to caffeine but still want the lift, or who have given up coffee because it agitates them, this is worth trying. 2 to 3 cups a day is where the anti-inflammatory research tends to cluster. Basic bags from any grocery store, no ceremony required. So, 10 foods, not one of them is exotic. Not one requires a specialty store or a protocol. Every single food on this list has been part of human diets for centuries. What's changed isn't the foods, it's how consistently they show up, or don't, in what most people are actually eating. You don't need all 10 at once. Trying to overhaul everything simultaneously is one of the most reliable ways to end up changing nothing. Pick 2 or 3 from this list that feel most realistic right now. Get those into your routine consistently, then add another one. The research isn't built on dramatic overhauls, it's built on sustained patterns. I want to say something before we wrap up, because I think it matters more than any individual food on this list. What clinical trials measure, the inflammation scores, the pain scales, those numbers aren't really the point. They're a way of measuring something that is the point. The point is picking up a cup of coffee and not thinking about it. Standing in the kitchen long enough to cook a real meal without stopping to sit down halfway through. Getting to a family gathering and actually being present, at the table, in the conversation, staying until the end. Not the person who had to leave early because they needed to rest. And for most people who make these changes consistently, the data says that's possible, meaningfully possible. I've heard people describe the moment things started to turn. And none of them described it dramatically. They noticed a morning that felt different. they got to the end of a day and realized they hadn't spent it tracking where it hurts. Small things, ordinary things becoming ordinary again. If you got something useful from this, even 1 or 2 foods you're going to actually try, that's enough to start, genuinely enough. Go pick up some salmon this week, make a cup of green tea today. See how things feel in 6 weeks. If this was helpful, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Leave a comment below. I read everyone, and I genuinely want to know what's working for you. Take good care.